budget is at the blandest level, the government statement of receipts and expenses. But this affects the entire economy, your life, your earnings, your job prospects, your nation's growth prospects. So it matters to people whether they relate to it in terms of the price of the gas cylinder at home or in terms of the tax saving allowed or the tax you have to pay. It's actually much bigger than that. Now, while you might think that it's just a matter of statement of expenses and receipts, uh, the balance between these decides your macroeconomic stability or stress. Now, what are the main things about the budget? What is the size of the budget? Now, developed nations actually have a fairly large proportion of government spending in relation to GDP. France, for example, the share of the government in the total output of the economy is something like more than 50%. The US is close to 40%. Britain, it's more than 40%. This is the case for most OECD countries. The lowest among OECD countries is 34% of GDP. India, state and the center combined is around 27% of GDP. So we are a relatively small government kind of economy. Not because the government doesn't want to spend more, but because of ability to raise taxes is less. And even though this 25% of GDP expenditure figure we have, only 17% is financed by tax receipts. Then we have around 6% of GDP as the government's borrowings, state and center combined. Vary from 6.3, 6.5% of GDP. And the rest are non-tax revenues of the government. Now, this borrowings, the fiscal deficit, so-called, or the center and the states, this is a very major factor which impacts the macroeconomic balance and stability of the economy. That's why you will find brokerages and analysts, everybody worrying about the size of the fiscal deficit. Is the government going to stick to its fiscal deficit target? Will it reach it? How large will it be? All these issues. Now, it's important to understand why this matters. Now, the most important summary document in the budget is this, the budget at a glance. Now, right at the bottom of the page, it mentions some assumptions. What is the size of the GDP that it estimates for the year in which the budget is made and the forthcoming year for which the budget is made. Now, this GDP is impacted by what the government does in terms of its fiscal deficit. It's like this. There is a simple macroeconomic identity which says that the total investment in the economy and the total domestic savings, the difference between these two is financed by the current account balance. If your domestic investment is larger than domestic savings, then you must have a current account deficit, right? And for a growing economy, developing economy like India, it makes sense to actually have investment which is larger than domestic savings, which means you must actually have a current account deficit rather than a surplus. But it's not too large because somebody has to finance this deficit. If the current account deficit balloons out of control, then those who are financing the deficit, that is, who is giving you the credit to run up this deficit, will lose confidence in you. They'll pull the plug and you are in deep trouble.
Yeah.
So have a small current account deficit. This is the sensible thing to do. Now, how this relates to the budget is through the savings part of this. I told you, investment less savings equals current account deficit. Now, the government's borrowings, that is the fiscal deficit, is a claim on the non-government sector's savings. Now, how large this government's claim on the non-government sector's savings actually decides whether this is destabilizing or pro-growth. Now, the non-government sector has its own needs for investment. If its savings are just enough to meet its own investment requirements and the government wants to still make a claim on it, then there's trouble. But if the non-government sector has investment plans which actually do not use up all their savings, then the spare savings they have, the government takes no problem. But in a situation like today, where the non-government sector is not investing at all. Today, our investment ratio, which is a total fiscal capital formation as a proportion of GDP, is actually below 27% of GDP, which is way, way below the peak achieved in 2007-8 of 38% of GDP. There is very little risk of the government claim on the non-government sector's savings destabilizing their own investment plans because they're not investing at all. So the government actually can afford to uh, expand the fiscal deficit a little beyond what would be possible in a normal year. So what happens is that the government borrows from the non-government sector's savings. If the that size of that borrowing is in excess of what the non-government sector has to spare after meeting its own investment requirements, then there is excess demand in the economy. This excess demand will be manifest in two ways. One, prices will go up, and two, that current account deficit will actually start beginning to rise because you are investing more than domestic savings, more than you had actually thought you would. So this is the macroeconomic balance issue relating to the fiscal deficit. The moment your fiscal deficit grows out of control, you run up a current account deficit larger than your plan to, and your prices start going up, both of which are against the interest of the economy.